Well, it's John from 1929FordHotRod.com. Today I'm going to do a little bit of brake work. I'm actually going to run the lines on my 1929 Ford Hot Rod. It's going to be a high boy, and I'm using all Corvette suspension. So here are the rubber hoses coming in off the caliper. You can see the damage that the brake fluid has done to the caliper. It's starting to peel the paint, so I'm going to have to redo that. But the brake line here is coming up underneath the frame and connecting to the bolt just by the sway bar here. So I developed a bit of a prototype for a mounting clamp here. What I ended up doing was making a couple of these brackets. I started out with some steel ones, and then I have this C-clip that will mount down and lock the hose in place with a small screw. I realized very quickly that if I make them out of steel, that it's going to be hard to keep the paint on. So what I ended up doing is going to the local steel supplier here in town, and I made up some brackets out of aluminum, and that's will be duplicated and go onto the hot rod instead of the metal clips that I originally made. So these little aluminum brackets were made on just from this 1.5 inch by 1/8 inch thickness aluminum stock, and it'll look a little bit nicer once it's all done. The brake hoses, I couldn't use the original brake hoses from the Corvette, so my friends at Napa helped me find something, and we came up with one. I just went in with an approximate length, and we found something that matched, and these guys at Napa have been really good to me. The only thing is I've got this here bracket on here, so I very carefully take a cutter and cut it off so that the hose is just a straight hose, no extra brackets or clamps on the hose. So hot rod should look pretty good. Hot rod doesn't need to be expensive, just needs to use a little imagination, and you can come up with some really cheap ideas to do things, as long as you got the time. Well, I'm all done. I've got all 4 brake line hose clamps made. It was an interesting development. I went from something like this, where I used the original spring-loaded C-clip to hold the hose in, to this steel clamp, to now where I have an aluminum fixture using a stainless steel screw holding in the C-clip onto the hose so that it won't move out. So I don't think it looks too bad, and again, just an evening worth of time, and you can have something that looks a little wee bit nicer and just is easier to maintain on the hot rod. So now I'm going to get these new hoses on and start running brake lines. Okay, I'm running the brake lines to the back. I'm going to attach the rubber hose to the wheel. I used the original T-connector from the rear of the Corvette donor car, the 1986 Indy Pace Car convertible, and I have it bolted to the side of the frame using a threaded insert. You can see the threaded insert for my bracket that I'm going to put the rubber hose on, and let's go put that on now. Okay, I've got my little aluminum bracket for the rubber hose that gets attached to the caliper, hooked up to the bolted to the frame, and everything seems to be clearing all the moving parts, which is quite critical. So now this is what it looks like on the passenger side. So it's I have it hooked up in exactly the same spot as I did on the driver's side, And there you can see my fuel pump and regulator. So now I'm going to just connect the brake tubing. I'm using the original Corvette master cylinder and booster. I've made my own brake pedal and linkage. I've just started to bend the brake tubing and connect it. So you got to make sure that you have the front and rear going to the right end of the car. So you can see here on my front, I'm going off to the front, and R for rear, going off to the rear. I did paint all these brake parts quite a while ago, and just a little bit of minor leakage has caused the paint to blister off. I didn't use an epoxy based paint for this because I wasn't really sure yet what color I wanted to do it, so I guess I'll be taking the paint off this part. Here I have the rubber hose connected to the front of the car. This one is kind of bolted right to the sway bar bolt, and then gets connected to the caliper, and again it clears everything. I'm using identical brake hoses for all four wheels. I think the aluminum brackets look quite a bit better. Later on, when I get everything painted, I'll maybe anodize these or polish them. We'll wait and see. Okay, now I'm going to put the brake tubing in. That'll connect both rear wheels together. And I've got this T-block that was used from the 86 Corvette donor car. I've bent the tubing and I'm running it along the back cross member here. Okay, so here it is. It's still running around the cross member, and then I've got it up underneath my fuel pump and regulator over to the fitting for the rubber hose. This tubing was pretty difficult to bend, and it would be hard to do just as is. So what I ended up doing was using a piece of baling wire to make a form before I did any of the bends. Okay, this is the wire that I used to come up with the shape for the rear brake line that connects the two rear wheels together. And once I had this to the shape and the exact length and dimensions that I wanted, I used that to recreate the actual tubing. So this worked out really quite well, and it's a time-saving tip, and you end up with a little more precision in the final product. To hold the brake line down, I use these little metal clips. They're rubber coated and zinc plated, so they seem to work out pretty well. They're 3/16 are meant for 3/16 inch tubing. This is the brake tubing on the front cross member. I also have a T connection there to connect both wheels together. You can see the little clamp that I'm using right here. And what I used is a number 8x32 stainless steel screw with a cap. It just makes it that much better. I like the rubber clamp, hose brake line clamp, rubber coated, because it's you know, steel on steel. It won't rub and cause other issues. I want to make sure the brake tubing is well fastened, because any vibration will cause an eventual brake failure and a possible disaster when driving. To attach the little clamps in the brake line T, I used threaded inserts. I drilled holes, and with a special insert tool, I've got an 8x32 in for the clamp, and I used a 1/4 inch coarse insert for the brake line T. I'm carrying on with the brake job. Now it's time to put the stoplight switch in. This is a pressure switch that I'm using. It's got an 1/8 inch pipe thread on the end, and my two electrical connectors on the other end. So this every time there's pressure, these two contacts will short out, turning the brake lights on. The problem with the European brake line fittings, it's hard to get a T-connector because of the bubble flare. They're using M10 by 1.0 threads, and it doesn't seem like anybody makes any of this stuff. You can get T-connectors no problem for the standard double flare brake lines, but these ones, nobody seems to have them. So what I ended up doing is using a 1/2-inch aluminum block, I ended up making my own T-connector after quite a journey looking for this. So on this side here will be my my pressure sensor. So I drilled and tapped in an 1/8-inch pipe thread, and then over here I made my brake line ends, and those are M10 by 1. So and I'm just using, I use 1/8-inch holes. I'll probably round this up a little wee bit and make it a little wee bit prettier, but it's all part of hot rodding, having to fabricate your own parts to do stuff. Okay, this is the pressure switch for the brakes that goes into the hydraulic brake system, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder a couple of wires on and put some heat shrink over. This is it'll just make for a little tidier connection because I don't have the electrical connectors that go over these little brass ends. Okay, I've got the brake line T in with my stoplight switch connected. Now it's just a matter of putting all the fasteners to the frame in. Well, I got a bunch of these little 3/16" brake line clamps down that are rubber coated. Again, I used 8x32 stainless steel screws with a stainless steel cap. These little clips are rubber coated and zinc coated. So I have it running along the frame here and making sure that everything is nice and tight. There's a tie wrap left over from holding things down. I did the same in the back here. I put the little clip in on both sides to make sure everything is good. I had to remove the fuel pump, which is alright because I got a rubber mount it so it's not as noisy on the frame when it's running. So I pretty much have the brakes all done here now.